Should I buy a flat or a house? It's one of the hardest questions to answer because every year the market changes. But I've been involved in buying thousands of properties over the years through our business, and we're buying lots more in 2025. So in this video, I'll break down the pros and cons of both options, how to decide which one is right for you, and what's changing in 2025. So let's start with the most obvious difference between flats and houses, which according to Zoopla can cost you up to £700 every month. To illustrate, let me introduce you to two investors, Sarah and Mike. Sarah bought a flat in Manchester city centre, while Mike bought a Victorian house in the suburbs. And last month, both of them had roof problems. Sarah went about her day in blissful ignorance while the building management company sorted it out. Mike wasn't so lucky. He spent weeks finding a good roofer, had to take time off work to meet them to get quotes, and ended up paying £5,000 for the repairs. And this is the problem with owning a house. Everything that goes wrong is your problem. The electrics, the roof, the building structure, it's all on you. I know investors with Victorian houses which they love, until they get hit with a £10,000 bill because the 50-year-old electrics need replacing. And as I mentioned, the average monthly maintenance cost for these older properties can be over £700 every month. Obviously, that cost doesn't apply to newer houses, but the time element very much does. So the first big advantage with flats is that you only have to look after your own space. Everything else is handled by someone else. By the way, throughout this video, I'm going to be referencing different costs for houses and flats. And if you have a specific deal in mind, you can download our deal calculator in the description and follow along. The second advantage is something that most new investors get completely wrong. When they look at a flat and see the service charge, they think it's just an extra cost. But let me tell you something that puts it into perspective. Last month, there was a problem with the gutters at one of my houses, and someone had to come around and get them unclogged and deal with the water damage it had done to the wall. That was £600 that I had to pay right away. And that's one major problem with houses. The bills are lumpy and unpredictable, and you need to have that money ready to go. But with a flat, there's an allowance in the service charge for routine maintenance. You pay a set amount each month, and it's all taken care of. A service charge will often also include a reserve fund that builds up over time to cover major non-day-to-day refurbishments and issues. But even if you do end up with a big issue that you have to pay extra for, you're still only paying your share, and you get some warning before you have to cough up. The clue is in the name. You're paying for services. It's not just a bill that you get lumped with for no reason. Every year you get a detailed statement showing exactly what you're paying for. So if your block is managed well, which I acknowledge is a big if, and we'll come to that, the service charge isn't an extra cost at all. You're getting something for it, plus peace of mind. Our next point is something that most people overlook, but it can be one of the biggest advantages of buying a flat. Let me use Manchester as an example. Since 2016, property prices there have absolutely exploded. And can you guess where that growth started? Yep, right in the city centre, where you'll mostly find flats. You might be wondering why this matters. Well, when a city starts growing, the city centre tends to grow first, then that growth ripples outward. So if you'd spotted Manchester's potential back in 2016 and you wanted to get in early, flats would have been your only option. Yes, you could have invested in houses further out, but you would have been waiting for longer to see that growth. So this is our third and probably the biggest advantage of flats. They give you access to prime city centre locations where houses mostly don't exist. So now you understand why flats can be a great investment. But before you rush out to buy one, there are some really important advantages to houses that you need to understand too. And these advantages directly address some of the biggest problems you might face with flats. Let's go back to Sarah and Mike from earlier. Sarah is trying to sell her flat, but the building looks shabby on the outside and it's putting buyers off. She asked for it to be repainted, but the management company said no. Sarah would be happy to pay her share of the cost, but the management company didn't want to go to the other owners and ask them for the money. This meant that her flat sat on the market looking tired and dated, while perfectly good buyers walked away. Meanwhile, Mike could just look at his house, decide it needs a fresh coat of paint, and get it done the next day. This brings us to the first big advantage of owning a house. You're in complete control. If you want to switch to a cheaper insurance provider or get an improvement made, you decide when and how. With a flat, every single one of these decisions needs approval. And if someone else wants something done and lobbies for it, you might even end up paying for things that you don't want or need. It's this lack of total control that, for me, is the key difference between flats and houses. People tend to fixate on the fact that with a flat, you don't actually own the land land it sits on. You're basically renting it through something called a lease. That's true, but in practical terms, it doesn't make much difference, especially by the time we've had some changes that I'll talk about a little later. What matters is that whatever the legalities, whenever you've got multiple flats in a block, you're going to have the need to make collective decisions. So you'll never get the same level of freedom you get with a house. And this freedom isn't just about day-to-day decisions. It actually opens up much bigger opportunities, which brings us to advantage number 2. Mike was recently looking at sale prices in his area, and he noticed that houses with extensions were selling for £50,000 more than his. Now, because Mike owns the house and the land it sits on, he has options. Subject to planning permission, he can choose to build that extension, even add an extra floor if he wants to. But as for Sarah, well, you don't tend to see too many 5th floor flats with extensions. And even for something smaller that could add value, like reconfiguring to create an extra bedroom, she'd likely need permission for any significant changes. So this highlights another big advantage of owning a house. You can more easily add value to it. Yes, you can renovate a flat. You can update the kitchen and the bathroom, but with a house, you can do so much more. So if you're looking to build in more profit for when you sell, or you want to borrow against increased value that you've created, then houses give you way more options to make that happen. But here's another big advantage of houses that most investors overlook. City centre flats tend to have a constant cycle of tenants moving in and out. It's a generalization, but it tends to be true. You're renting to young professionals who might move out of the area for work, or to students who finish their course, or to young couples who go on to buy their own place. And every time a tenant changes, this has a big impact on your wallet. You pay letting agent fees, the council tax bill reverts to you until new tenants are found, and you deal with wear and tear that you might not be able to fully claim back. Plus, of course, there's any empty time between tenants when you're earning nothing at all. This high turnover is one of the most annoying disadvantages of owning a flat, because with houses, you typically get families who are more likely to put down roots in the area and stay for longer. Another challenge with flats is that you're not just banking on the quality of your own property. You're putting your trust in how well the entire building has been put together. Some conversions, for example, are done beautifully, but in others, your tenants might hear every footstep from upstairs and every conversation from next door. And it's not just about the building itself. You're also relying on the quality of the management company. Some are fantastic, professional, and great at maintaining the building, whereas others, well, let's just say that they're a common theme in landlords writing into our newspaper column for help. When we help our clients buy flats, we only work with developers where we know from their past projects that the build quality will be strong, and we always investigate into who manages the building. Sometimes we can even negotiate to have a say in choosing the management company, because that's how important it is. However, aside from the core differences between flats and houses, there are 2 important things you need to know that make this decision a bit different in 2025. First, the government is making big changes to fix some of the historical problems with flats. They're making lease extensions simpler and more predictable. They're preventing management companies from taking huge commissions for arranging buildings insurance. And they're working to replace the whole leasehold system with something called common hold, where flat owners collectively own the land. But don't get too excited. They're calling it a whole of parliament commitment, which basically means it won't happen anytime soon. And even when it does, you'll still need someone managing the building and making collective decisions. Unless you have a neighbour with a lot of time on their hands, that's going to involve paying a management company. But the great news is, the mere threat of pending legislation has stamped out some of the worst practices. And already, ground rent on new leases has been banned completely. So if you're buying a newly built apartment today, that's not something you'll have to think about. The second thing you need to know in 2025 is about the price of flats, because flats might be seriously undervalued right now. Of course, on average, houses are always more expensive than flats. But if you look at the data from 2005 to 2018, flats kept pace with houses for growth. In fact, they were closing the gap between the two. Then 2 things happened. Of course, COVID hit, and suddenly everyone wanted a house with a garden. And there was also the cladding crisis that made many flats impossible to sell. And combined, these 2 factors created the biggest price gap we've ever seen between houses and flats. So why does this matter for 2025? Well, those COVID priorities are fading away. The cladding issues are being resolved. And with energy bills and property prices so high, many people are being pushed towards flats. In other words, all the factors that created this price gap are disappearing. And when you see a gap in the market that has no real reason to exist, that's usually where you find the biggest opportunities. So should you buy a flat or a house in 2025? Well, the last couple of properties that I've bought have been flats. So I'm tempted to pick up a house next to keep a balance in my portfolio. But as I've said, I believe the prices of flats might be more likely to pick up and close that gap. So maybe I'll take advantage of that. But I won't be losing any sleep over the decision because it doesn't actually matter that much. Maybe you've heard too many horror stories about flats from friends, or maybe you can't bear the thought of all the responsibilities that go along with owning a house. Either of those is absolutely fine. You can build a successful property business with either one. But here's what I do and what we encourage our clients to do is stay open to both, because when you do that, you get access to twice as many opportunities. At the end of the day, the best property investment isn't about houses or flats. It's about finding the right deal for you. So how do you do that? Well, check out this video next, where I explain step by step exactly how to do that in 2025.